to the way my schedule works, I can only get in 2 thematic reviews for the month of October. Since the Nameless game and the Nameless Game I, having released only in Japan, were relatively obscure, I figured I'd shine light on another obscure title. Not because it didn't release outside of Japan, but because it just never took off. This game is all about ghosts, but the biggest and baddest of them all is you. Prepare yourself for a good and spooky haunting, because this is my review of Geist for the Nintendo Gamecube. From start to finish, Geist takes place in first person. It's easy to just call it a first-person shooter, and you do plenty of shooting, but that's not all you do. Your most basic form is your ghost form. With the exception of the final boss, your pure ghost form can't really harm anyone. In ghost form, the world moves in slow motion, and you can briefly float as well as slip through cracks. You can use plants to sustain your constantly depleting spiritual energy, apparently your soul being pulled into the afterlife, but you'll want to find some kind of host before too long. The most basic is inanimate objects that you can possess without having to do anything first. In some cases, like explosives and turrets, you can use this to kill enemies, but more often than not, the object is just to scare someone or something. Humans and other animals fall roughly into the same category of hosts that already have a soul. Thus, you can't just take them over, you have to scare them first. The game represents this by making mildly scared beings emit a yellow aura, and ones that you can possess have a red one. Different animals have different quirks about them, like bats being capable of flight. They can also have detrimental ones, like a possessed mouse still being attracted to rat traps, which can cause a lot of damage should it clamp down. Even people aren't entirely the same, since some have guns but a lot of others don't. Some will even have fears, which works in opposite to the aforementioned mouse attraction, where they will refuse to get near certain things or people. This adds to the puzzle element where you have to navigate certain obstacles. This is one of my main criticisms with the game. The ghost possession mechanic is quite impressive, but the game somewhat restricts this by making solutions linear and often with only one answer. It's really more about solving a puzzle than to freely fly as a force of nature who can take anyone at any time. I kinda get why it was done the way it was, but having more freedom of choice would have fit better with this kind of premise. For example, at one point in the game, you possess a chef and poison a squad of men with soup. While that was a pretty stellar moment, imagine if you had the option to possess a lone soldier in a corner somewhere if you preferred to go gunning through that area. The chef could have been optional rather than the mandated solution. And speaking of shooting, my other main criticism would be once you're in possession of someone carrying a gun. The shooting mechanics aren't the smoothest, and there's an overall laggish feeling to aiming. It is GameCube era, so it's somewhat more forgiving, but they could have been tightened up. On the plus side, there's an abundance of first aid kits everywhere, and each host has infinite ammo. That alleviates things, since you really only have to keep an eye on your health and how much ammo's in your clip, reload often, and all that good stuff. Late game, when you get your own body back, and the one before then, you gain the ability to temporarily slow things down. It basically works like your ghost form, but you've got both an automatic rifle and gas grenades to attack during it. Most enemies don't have that ability, so it's just a free opportunity to shred them up or get to safety. Some things to note is that you can use the D-pad to access your current objective, a 3D map, and an inventory menu. I didn't really make use of these functions all that much, but it could come in handy if you need a recap before you need to go or what exactly it is you're doing. The inventory screen I've used even less, but it has 3D viewable models of your stuff a la the model viewer in Resident Evil, so that's pretty cool. One interesting thing is that there are 2 types of collectibles that can unlock content. One you specifically have to be in ghost form to collect, and the other specifically in a host to collect. Obviously, the latter might require you to do some backtracking, since you can just pop out of a host immediately to grab a ghost collectible, but you have to find a host for the other one. Thankfully, the hosts are all kinda stupid and will sit there confused until you repossess them, especially important for mission-critical hosts you can't afford to lose. There are actually a couple of boss fights where you can possess grenades or rockets and turn them on the one who fired them, which is probably the closest thing to an optional possession in this game. With those criticisms, you would think the game would be something of a chore to go through. I wouldn't necessarily say that. It dulls the shine just a bit, but the concept still carries it through, or at least to me it did. It's pretty obvious that managing an inventory isn't the focus, since you get infinite resources with hosts that have weapons. Really, the only thing you have to do is keep them alive and solve puzzles along the way. Occasionally you get a boss fight, with 2 bosses being sort of reoccurring. Those are a boss that likes to poke its head out of the ceiling and shoot fireballs at you, and the other one likes to roll around like Armadillo from Donkey Kong 64. That's not to say there isn't room for variety, and the final boss actually takes place in the spiritual realm where you fight in ghost form. The game also has multiplayer, for what that's worth. I haven't really played it due to a lack of friends that I could play it with. It's there though for anyone who's interested. Ultimately, the gameplay has some rough spots, but the concept is pure gold. It's only really a shame the blemishes hold it back somewhat. It would have been nice to see what they could have really done had they been allowed to make a follow-up game. As is, I'd still say the gameplay gets my approval, just know what you're getting yourself into. Spoiler warning, presentation is in the timestamp. If you want to skip past this, the big scary demon will be coming for you if you fail to heed this warning. We good now? Alright, moving on. The story isn't the game's strongest aspect, but that's not to say it's bad at all. It even sort of fakes you out by looking like a standard military shooter. You know, if you ignore the game's menu and box that show that it's all about ghosts, but that comes later. You start out as a soldier named John Ramey infiltrating a facility where they're apparently planning some sort of biological weapon. It's about as generic can get. You get a sample of some microorganism and then you have to shoot your way back to extraction. The boss creature that hangs from the ceiling first appears here, but otherwise it seems like pretty standard fare. That is, until a phantom possesses one of your fellow soldiers, shoots another one, and then shoots Ramey in the head just as he was getting extracted. It wasn't quite so lethal, but they hook him up to a machine that rips his soul right out of his body. They then proceed to put him through a training simulator to try to brainwash and teach him to become their own phantom soldier. Thankfully, this doesn't come to pass because the training simulator quickly glitches out. Turns out a little girl ghost named Gigi sabotaged the machine to free you. She teaches you the basics of being a ghost, possessing objects and scaring people to be able to enter them. She's not just a glorified tutorial though, she's actually tied into the main plot of the game. You find out later on that the old man who runs the place is actually her older brother, Alexander. While they were left home alone, she wanted to play but he refused, she was injured, and so he resorts to the occult in an attempt to fix her. If there's ever a case of, boy, that escalated quickly, this would be it. This, of course, goes horrifically wrong because a demon that's summoned straight up kills her and inserts a part of itself into him before he's able to seal up the demon again. As the game progresses, it ties into the military aspect because Ramey's friend Bryson was captured to go through the same spirit-ripping procedure. You end up destroying the machine, but the stubborn and idiotic commander decides the rift must be boosted to avoid closing off. Just to show you what a stupid monster he is, he straight up shoots someone for trying to warn him what will happen without a containment field. Predictably, it all goes wrong as the aforementioned demon breaks out and changes Alexander from being just slightly influenced to full-on possessed. Also, the rift ends up closing anyway, so good job. What was a simple military operation in the beginning becomes a full-on fight for humanity's future as you fight to get your body back, confront Alexander, and then obliterate the demon that's possessing him. Luckily, Ramey's up for the task, and Alexander and Gigi end up being reunited as ghosts. Bryson picks up Ramey and they all live happily ever after, well, sort of. Ultimately, the plot more than did what it needed to do. It could come across as corny at times, but it fittingly raised the stakes at every turn. The more simple little girl trying to save her big brother plot blends nicely with the military and demonic aspects, and I'd say it was enough to keep me interested. The subplot with the three scientists was pretty funny too as a justification to make you choose which weapon you wanted. Little things like that really add to the story, and while it was nothing groundbreaking, I'd still give it my approval. I understand this is the shocker of the century, but Geist doesn't exactly hold up graphically compared to brand new games. If you can actually get around that, it actually looks pretty impressive for a Gamecube game. Having released in 2005, it's now over 16 years old, and I think it still looks reasonably well emulated in 1080p. The most visually impressive thing about the game has to be its environments. Not unlike Metroid Prime, there's a good amount of environmental detail, and the environments themselves are varied enough. It does take place in a military base, but it walks you through different aspects of it. You've got locations like a training simulator, a dog kennel, a cafeteria, bathrooms, a locker room, and others. The training simulator itself presents a reasonable excuse to have two very differently styled environments in their own right, adding further variety. The first one acquainting you with your ghost abilities is a pleasant green field and made to be as non-threatening as possible. The second, though, is based off of the summit the game's plot is themed around. There's not only a courtyard, but an office complex for you to blaze through. They provide a very nice change of scenery from the usual complex. There's also more open outdoor areas as well as old ruins you can find. You even end up in an old manor where the game's plot emanates from. The human characters do show its age a bit more, but they're nothing that bad. It tries to go for a realistic style, and while they aren't the most expressive, they're expressive enough. The game even has plenty of fan service in the locker room. What? I was just referring to Samus Aran's helmet in the lockers. Honestly, what other kind of fan service can there possibly be in a women's locker room? Interestingly though, it also showcases that there are mirrors in the game's world, albeit rarely that are fully reflective. It provides a rare opportunity to see yourself in full apart from the small representation on the UI. I mentioned Ghost Form sees the world in slow motion, but it also alters the contrast a bit and has the world in a bloom. It really gives it a sort of vivid, surreal, and almost dreamlike quality without it being overbearing. It really is a nice effect. Different animal hosts also see the world differently too, like some will see it in black and white, and others will have various kinds of filters. Possessing objects will have you inside the object somewhere. Thankfully, all hosts show a third-person model of themselves in the corner of the UI, handy for objects so you can actually see the whole thing. The game does have some voice acting, but it's mainly reserved for important characters and cutscenes. When you're in control, characters just have a voice quip and text dialogue. John Raimi himself is also the typical silent protagonist. It's sort of a shame since it would be funny to hear him with different voices like the female you possess. The voice acting won't exactly win any Academy Awards, but it'll do. Some like Bryson and Old Man Volk have surprisingly good voices, while others like the Commander, not so much. The music though tends to be very good. It has a very epic orchestral feel to it and tends to play during heated action segments. More calmer moments like when you're solving a puzzle tend to forego music in favor of ambiance. Ultimately, I'd say the presentation is very solid. Graphically, it holds up better than you would think for the era and is done much more justice when I play through it in 1080p. Audibly, the voice acting isn't the best consistently, but the music is excellent. It gets my approval for sure. If I had to describe this game in 2 words, it would sadly be wasted potential. The concept is a real diamond in the rough, with the execution being mostly the rough. It's obvious that the game is rough around the edges, with shooting that could use some more refinement and being a touch too linear for my liking. I'm sure if it got more entries like that cancelled DS game, it could have been polished up a bit better over time. As is, it's a little janky, but the premise itself shines through quite brightly. I'd recommend giving it a playthrough just to experience the unique thrill of possessing a soldier and then going in guns blazing. This has been my review of Geist for the Nintendo Gamecube. I've got a live stream Friday at 4:30 p.m., news video next Thursday at 6 p.m., and Let's Plays at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. daily. All Eastern Standard Time, but subscribe and hit that bell icon if you want to keep notified. A like is always appreciated, but I just hope you genuinely enjoyed it. Thank you so much for tuning in with me in this week's epic freebie until next Thursday's Dark the Complete Edition. Capitalize on life, peace out, have a good one, and have a nice and pleasant day.